So I've got Storyboard running here, and this is the first screen that you'll see when you launch it after you do the install. And there's links here to our tutorials, documentation, support, getting started. So all these are really good resources when you're new to playing around with it. In the getting started section on our website, there's also a lot of how-to videos. There's links to other webinars as well. Or if you're a docs person, the docs are a great resource. You can read through them. We include a PDF in the installation or in our knowledge base. Everything's online. But going through and walking through it, this is where I like to open up a Photoshop file. And this is something that it might be whether if you're working with a design team in-house or maybe a third-party design firm, or maybe you're doing everything yourself. But you can actually design and lay out a UI in a tool like Photoshop or Sketch and then import it into our tool. So you can see here I've got this sort of a home control IoT type panel application where we've got a screen for thermostat. We've got, a screen that's going to give us weather updates, settings for the home, in this case, internationalization, screen brightness, other aspects here. So I've got a couple different views, a nice security panel, all that. And they've been laid out in Photoshop, with using something called artboards. But basically all you're seeing here is, each block is going to act as a screen in our tool, and this is going to be one view or state of the application. The other thing that's nice is there's a hierarchy applied in the design file that's going to be respected when we import into the tool. So you're going to see here with some naming conventions _layer there. Following these guidelines, you can actually get a lot for free. And when I do the import, all of our screens are going to respect this naming convention, and also layers that are duplicated. So you see this background layers on every screen. They aren't going to be duplicated, but they get reused in our tool. So again, a lot of benefits that you can get from coming through here. Also, these buttons, they're going to have up and down states already hooked up on them, simply because we've hooked them up in this design file as well. So there is a control on and off that you can toggle, and as we go through, we'll benefit from that. So enough about Photoshop. We're going to jump over to Storyboard, and I'm going to close down my welcome view. And this is the empty view. If you've installed it for the first time, if you've ever used Eclipse, you're likely familiar with the layout. We're built on top of the Eclipse framework. And that's nice from a support of multiple platforms, but it's also useful because we support a lot of the third-party plugins, especially around things like source control. So if you're using SVN or Git, you can download those plugins and integrate into your favorite revision control system. Everything that we do in this tool is still obviously UI and Storyboard specific, but we don't want to impact your workflow, and we want to encourage collaboration across multiple sources as well. So we can import our design file a few different ways. There's this button on the application model on the left. There's also an icon on the toolbar, multiple different ways to do it. But if you select that, you'll be greeted with a dialog and a wizard. And I'm going to navigate to that design file. And this is just on my desktop there. And I'm going to leave everything default here. Really, all that's happening is, this option here is simply saying import our PSD. Text layers is something you can edit. If you didn't want to do that, they would all be baked into images. Historically, some platforms really didn't have much memory, and we saw people baking their text and their fonts into the images. So that's an option. The other thing too is maybe you already have a project started and you're getting design files piecemeal. You could import them into existing projects as you receive them. In this case, we're starting from scratch, so I'll leave that there. Hitting finish, we are basically parsing the file. So our tool, we open up the Photoshop file, we're looping through it, we're parsing it, and we're pulling all the assets in. And you can see here, we've got the same layout that we had in Photoshop. We have all of our screens. I believe there's 7 screens here, actually 6. They look exactly the same, and if I were to start expanding them on the left here, stick with the thermostat screen, let's say, you can see here, we have the same layers and layout that we had before. This background layer, it's shared across all the different screens. So, in this case, I can toggle visibility. There's not a lot going on there, but we can actually, save on memory because we design it once and apply it in many different places. The same thing applies to this menu screen. So if I were to do something like grab the Crank Software logo and drag it over here, you can see it adjusts on every screen there. So again, we're really big on minimizing duplication of effort. We want you to be able to define something once, reuse it, and go from there. The first thing that we might want to do is, choose a main screen, a start screen. By default, our application, it chose the setting security. It's just going in alphabetical order, but I'll go ahead and I'll set the thermostat screen to be our start screen. If we haven't really done anything yet, but we could actually just launch this application. So you see here, if I click the tablet icon on the top left corner, we're running the application, and this is using the Storyboard engine and technology. It's simply running in a Windows environment, and it can leverage OpenGL since I'm on a desktop computer. But is exactly what you're going to see on the embedded system. And this is very powerful and important because it allows you to develop and iterate very, very quickly. You can prove out the flow of the UI application before you even have to interface with hardware. Maybe you've built up an application and your hardware team is still bringing up the board, or maybe they haven't even picked hardware yet. You can develop in parallel. These buttons also have those press and release events already hooked up to them. So remember, I said in the design file, you can follow some naming conventions and you can get something for free. So, right now we've built up, the shell of an application without really doing anything except import a design file. If I close this, it's pretty easy to start building up and adding behavior. And that's really what we're all about. We want to accelerate the workflow. We want you to add behavior into your application. We don't want you to have to fiddle around too much with, pushing pixels or writing layout markup or code you might be familiar with in other tools. So if we wanted to go ahead and create some transitions to different screens, it'd be very easy to do that. If I select this weather tab at the bottom, so you can see here, I click that, the model view on the left is updating to show what I've selected and where it's located. So on the thermostat screen, in the menu layer, the weather control, and then you can see all the properties that are associated with it here on the right. So everything implicitly has a width, a height, an X and a Y, and this control in and of itself is built up of text and some image content. And you can have any sort of combination of different elements in Storyboard to build up effects that you're looking for. This palette view on the left shows you kind of what we can do in terms of primitive rendering. So things like circles and arcs, polygons, fills, which is just a solid block of color, images, and that's where you're going to get more detailed things like the background there, that sort of textured effect. 3D models, if you have that capability, you can build up anything that you need from these. In this case, we have our control, so this rectangular area on the screen, and this is going to determine the ability to interact with it. So, if I wanted to say hook up a press event and change screens, anywhere within this bounds could react to an event. And to do that, I can right click, say add an action, and you can see here we're greeted with a wizard, and this shows some of our available events and actions that we can use. And this is a really good point to talk about, how the behavior system in Storyboard works. Everything in our engine is event driven. And what that means is, we don't do anything unless something explicitly tells us to or gives us notification. The event panel here, you know, that is that first kickoff, that trigger, that behavior. And it could be anything like you can see here, we've got some hook into the Android life cycles, gestures, input, so key up, key down, or in this case, we want touch. Touch is simply the combination, you know, press and release on a control. And then we want to trigger a behavior. The behavior we want is a screen transition. We've got a number of things available to us with 3D effects, also things with different transitions, you know, fade or sliding. In this case, I'll just simply fade to a new screen. And this is where, you know, we selected our weather control, so we want to go to the weather screen. I'll select that, hit finish. And you can see here in the panel on the bottom, interactions panel, we see that trigger event. So this event, touch, triggers the action of a screen transition. And then just for simplicity, if I click that, you can see the options are available there, but I'll copy this, right click, and paste it onto our thermostat button. And then the last thing I'll do is I'll update the destination, thermostat, save that. And then if I run it, you can see here we have our button inputs, but you know, I can fade to our new screen, and we have a way to quickly go back and forth. Another interesting thing, you know, one thing you may not have, you probably haven't seen, but we have this hamburger button on the right here. So we also have this scrolling menu layer, and right now it's off screen, but we could actually shift it in and sort of create a nice little animation for it. So if I start adjusting the X coordinates, move it over 200, let's say, oops. Actually, all the elements underneath it. So you can move those over. So I'll say bring those all to be 0. You can see here we've got this menu. So we can go ahead and create an animation to slide those in and out. And that's pretty easy. The first thing I might want to do is, since we have a number of different controls here, I'll go ahead and I'll just add them to a group. You know, you can see here where, you know, we have multiple screens. Each screen can have multiple layers. And traditionally, we've only had controls, but you can also use a group as sort of an organizational context. And that, as you can see, makes it a little bit easier for me to adjust all of those elements at once. Perfect. So now that we have that, we can create an animation. And an animation is simply a transition of a property over time. So, you know, as I'm clicking through things, you see these elements in the property on the right, you know, X, Y coordinates. In the case of specific controls, you can see if we have text, images, you know, all of these elements, these are all properties. We can all manipulate them at runtime. You'll notice here a lot of them have these angled bracket icons beside them. You know, this simply says we can bind something called a variable to it and control that. So keeping that in mind, and we'll sort of take a look at what that means shortly, but you know, we can then build up an animation to say adjust the position of something over a duration. So going back to the main control group, we could slide this X coordinate over 500 milliseconds, a second, what have you. So if I click this little recording animation icon in the top, now you see we've got this red outline, so we're recording a frame or a step, if you will, and that's simply a duration over time. I'll go ahead and adjust this to be 0. And then I'll go ahead and close off the animation, and we'll give it a name. I'll say menu open, and I can leave everything here default. You could adjust the frame rate if you want, if you wanted it to loop using absolute values, but I'll leave that. And you can see now in the animation timeline, it's opened up for us. It's going to look at a property, which is the scrolling menu layer main menu control group dot grd_x. So again, that's the X property, and it's going to adjust it over half a second. So the tool did its best guess to say, okay, you know, we're just going to default to half-second increments. So we can go ahead and preview it, and you can see here it slides in. I can step through that animation. It looks all right to me, but if you weren't happy with it, you could just as easily go, adjust the duration, so maybe 750 milliseconds, and change the easing rate to sort of a ease in or create your own custom curves. That's all supported here as well. If we simulate that again, it sort of snaps in a little bit. You can drag it around. Ready enough for us to play around with. So if I go back, view our list of animations that are available. You see menu open. I can click on this hamburger button. I can right click and say add an action. And similar to what we did before, this is where I can go through. I can use a touch event, select an animation, and do menu open. I'll go ahead and hit finish. And the last thing that we might want to do is we have a way to open the menu, but we don't actually have a way to close it. So we offer another, a nice shortcut functionality where I could click on this, right click and say add reversed animation. And that'll go ahead and reverse everything for us. So I'll leave the naming convention, as it is, _reverse. It seems to make sense. And then I can go ahead and hook up that reversed animation on one of the sub controls. So, from playing around with this, I know this main menu control is sort of the top most one. So I'm going to go ahead and hook it up to that. So again, touch, animation, menu open, reversed. Hit finish, save that. And if we simulate, you can see we have our application. We still go to our weather screen or thermostat, but now we have a nice animation to slide our menu out. And then when I hit that top area here, we can close up the animation. So we have that nice sort of behavior and functionality. And that's, really the core fundamentals of what, working with Storyboard is all about. The one detail that may not be explicitly obvious to you, but whenever I mention, binding a variable to something, that's what gives you programmatic control. So, you could go ahead and bind a variable to this text element and turn it into something that was dynamic. Right now it's just static text, but you could bind a variable and then control that with a Lua script, C callbacks if you're running on an MCU system, or you could directly set the value through another different form of action and event binding. But really anything that you can create a binding to, you can manipulate. And the event system is how you add in that behavior. So again, remembering that events trigger actions, actions do things. That's some of the core principles. A lot of what you do will be derivatives and variations on this. So they're fairly simple but powerful concepts in practice. But I've played around in the tool a little bit. I want to actually show you what it means to be doing the next step, which is playing around with hardware and seeing what that looks like. So just to show you what I've got going on here, I do actually have a webcam hooked up and the hardware running. So I apologize from a visual side. It's probably not the most clear from the view, but this is an IMX8M Mini running one of our demos. And you can see here, I can select different demos here, do the medical one, launch it. And, there's a wide range of different things that you can accomplish. This has some trend graphs going. It's got a menu here. If I wanted to, view some patients. It's got some 3D models, options that I can drag around. So again, the capabilities are really full featured in the tool. But I just wanted to showcase this because this is something you can download off of our website and play around with it, because you obviously are going to want to start experimenting and prototyping on hardware to see how things run. So this is great. It's our default, our default launcher and application. And if you open up a terminal, and I have a network terminal, SSH terminal open to the board right now. Under user crank, there are a couple different directories. And this is where, kind of what are the few things that are required to run a Storyboard application. You need our runtime binary. So under runtimes, there is the, this runtime directory, and that includes, a list of plugins, binaries, all of our stuff here. It's pre-configured. And we ship one of these for each embedded hardware platform. So, maybe you're running on a Raspberry Pi, STMP1, NXP board, Renaissance, RZG board, all of those are available, and they live in our installation directory for the product. So you simply need to drop one of those in. Then there's going to need to be a script. And by default, there is a startup script and a service running on this board that auto launches Storyboard, and it can be found under etc initd. You see there's a storyboard launcher.sh, and that launches on startup, and it runs as a service. So you could start and stop the Storyboard environment if you wanted. But there's also another thing that comes with all of our demo images, and it's these SCP directories and Storyboard SCP scripts here. So if I make this a little bit bigger for you, this script here simply goes through, slays off any instances of Storyboard that are running, and then exports a couple variables. And the few things that you need to run Storyboard are the SB plugins environment variable and the LD library path. And exporting those, you can execute the binary. So again, under the Storyboard runtime directory, there's also going to be a bin SPEngine executable. So if you execute that and then point it at an exported application, you can launch that. So this has been configured to launch Storyboard with an SCP'd application from the design environment. If you still don't understand all of this, or you're new to sort of a shell environment, that's okay. We got lots of information on our website, but I just wanted to call this out so you're aware of how it's doing things. And if you are looking, to poke around and understand it, this is where you can go. So the last thing that we want to do is, if we jump back to our design environment, this is where we can export our application. Our project lives in a workspace on the desktop. There's a GDE file. It's the model we're editing here. All of our images live within the image directory. If we were to build up any scripts, they'd live there. Fonts, they all live there. So starting this, we'll prep it to be exported. And there's a couple different things you can do. I mean, one, you could open up the export configurations and you could pick and choose exactly what you wanted to include. Images, exclude some of the other ones, fonts, things like that. And you can get a rough estimate for memory footprints and information here. You can also go through and open up your export configurations and view your resources from here as well. So again, making sure that you're adding everything that you want. So you could click through and say, I want to include all my fonts, images, events, stuff like that. We don't have any scripts, so I don't need to click that. Hit apply. And then we can go through and export. And the last thing that we want to do there, choose our packager. In this case, we want to export as a GAPP or a GAP file. We also have the ability to export for Android. You could export for iOS if you're running a Mac. Standalone Windows EXE, C, C++ header file for an embeddable resource if you're on an MTU board. Also a compressed self-extracting archive as well. We're going to stick with that. If you had a special export configuration, you could pick it there. And the last step is we want to run with this SCP transfer. So I've already got the information here, my IP address, username, password, default Yocto Linux images, and all the ones that we ship is set to root, which obviously for production, you'd want to change that, but for simplicity and development, got that here. We're going to export it to the SCP directory under user crank. And then after it's executed, we want to call this launch script. So now I can hit apply, hit run. and we're just simply running the export process. Hit OK. And in the webcam, you can see we've got our application. So now if I were to click that button, we're fading between different screens. We also have our animation here and our plus minus states. So yeah, that's pretty much it from just getting off the ground running. There's definitely a lot more to go under, and we've got a lot of resources about some of the more advanced characteristics of Storyboard. But that's sort of your quick getting started, getting off the ground running. The last thing I will say as well is we include a lot of samples. So you're probably saying, well, I'm not an expert in Photoshop or Sketch. How can I play around with something without that? We include a number of samples here that you can import if you're curious about how you might build up different concepts. Lots of animations are handled, address book, maybe internationalization, different fonts, a virtual keyboard. We've got stuff for that here. So again, really, if you're looking to build up and play around, there's a lot of resources there. And if you're not sure how to do it, by all means, poke around, check out our support forums, contact support, check our help desk, all of that. But most importantly, just we encourage you to play and see what the tool can do.